Trump gave a speech on his economic agenda at the Economic Club of Detroit yesterday. It was heavy on anti-trade invective and high fructose promises. Basically, it was a Democrat campaign speech. The editors at National Review would feel a great deal better about his energy agenda if Trump hadn't recently expressed sympathy with the Tom Steyer. Remember who Tom Steyer is? King Coal, who's the big green energy left-wing nut, George Soros clone. Tom Steyer-backed initiative to ban hydraulic fracturing in Colorado. It will be difficult to secure the fruits of a 21st century energy revolution if we mandate 19th century extraction practices. That ought to tell you all you need to know about Donald Trump's energy policies. I mean, think about it. Green energy is the scam, the fraud of the 21st century, and therefore nothing could be more in Donald Trump's wheelhouse. Energy is an important driver of the U.S. economy. So is trade. And on trade, Trump promises nothing less than chaos. He threatens to pull out of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which has contributed both to employment and economic growth in the United States. It is a critical factor in states such as Texas, where manufacturing and service businesses do substantial business in Mexico. Here, Trump's usual weakness, his shallowness, one of many, is on unfortunate display. He notes that before NAFTA, there were 285,000 auto workers in Michigan, whereas today there are only about 160,000. Is he running for governor of Michigan or president of the United States? But the U.S. automotive industry is in fact thriving, creating thousands of high-wage jobs, but not in Michigan. Detroit is a lost city, a monument to communist misgovernance. And while Michigan has made some strides in the right direction, including the passage of a right-to-work law, a milestone achievement for which Governor Rick Snyder has received insufficient credit, years of domination by the United Automobile Workers Union and its allies have taken a grave toll. Americans still build great cars, but they build them in Texas and Alabama, not in Michigan. Rather than threaten to disrupt international trade relations over fictitious Mexican trade buccaneering, Trump would do better to notice that many of the high-end vehicles U.S. auto workers are building today say Mercedes and Toyota on the back, and work to strengthen those trade relations. Beyond that, Trump and the rest of the trade critics should turn their focus from highly visible consumer goods to capital goods and industrial supplies, which account for 2/3 of U.S. exports. You don't come to American firms if you want somebody to sew a pair of sneakers. You come to American firms if you want to build a sneaker factory. On taxes, Trump offers an incoherent program, a dog's breakfast of proposals obviously engineered with an eye to nickel and diming his way to victory. For example, his proposal to create a 100% deduction against taxes rather than taxable income for money spent on childcare will be welcome news to Manhattan families with expensive nannies and to babysitters from coast to coast. But it is a terrible policy that will prove very expensive and will provide an economic incentive for, ta-da, outsourcing parenting duties rather than having them done by parents themselves. His proposed simplification and reduction of the federal income tax brackets is welcome and dishonest, because he doesn't mean that for a minute. But it would be much better if that proposal were accompanied by a serious plan for reducing spending proportionately. That's another way you can know that the reducing tax rates is he doesn't really mean it. It isn't serious, and his reliance upon the mantra of waste, fraud, and abuse The habitual incantation of the cowardly Washington careerists Trump sneers at points to a deep and dangerous unseriousness about reducing deficits. Remember, Trump loves debt even more than Hillary. Remember, he wants his American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to be twice as big as Hillary's. Economic programs offered in presidential campaigns are like battle plans in that they very rarely survive their first contact with reality. But they do speak to a candidate's understanding of the issues, to his approach to economic questions, and to his view of the proper role of the federal government in economic affairs. Trump's habitual National Socialism leaves him disinclined and ill-positioned to make difficult decisions, and his neo-mercantilist disposition inclines him to blame the necessity of negotiating painful trade-offs on enemies, foreign and domestic, whether in Mexico City or on Wall Street. Tell me again how he's not a Democrat. A simplified tax code and an energized energy sector would indeed be welcome and profitable. Too bad Trump's not in favor of it. And that Trump has a seriousness or the political capacity to get here from there is, well, he just doesn't. How horrific a situation is it when we have to decide which is better? That the Republican presidential nominee is insane, or that the Republican presidential nominee is a pathological liar? Especially when the truth is he's both. Well, Kevin Williamson had some thoughts on the matter also at National Review this morning. Now, Donald Trump has some big ideas about Social Security. Happily, he is almost certainly lying about them. Trump is, politically speaking, a weather vane, prone to telling every audience what he believes it wants to hear, irrespective of what he said an hour ago or plans to say an hour hence. Parenthetically, doesn't that make him the epitome of the professional establishment politician? Connect the dots, Trumplicans. Understand, realize, accept how much, how deeply, how completely you have been fooled, swindled, bilked, hoodwinked, taken to the cleaners, humiliated. Our friends at the National Rifle Association, which foolishly endorsed Trump, learned this the hard way when barely 2 weeks after putting their imprimatur on the Trump campaign, he turned around and endorsed the Barack Obama-Hillary Clinton position on stripping Americans of their Second Amendment rights. Yeah, that's right. You heard me say it. I'll say it again. The Trump campaign turned around and endorsed the Barack Obama-Hillary Clinton position on stripping Americans of their Second Amendment rights without any sort of due process through executive fiat. That puts an additional ironic bit of context around Trump's Second Amendment supporters might do something about it if Hillary Clinton decides to appoint Supreme Court justices that would repeal the Second Amendment. Ha ha, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Don't you think? He'll tell the NRA what they want to hear. And he'll tell the gun-loathing soccer moms in suburbia what they want to hear, too. But then I suppose that's perfectly all right with Trump supporters. Anything that it takes to win. Because you're all about winning, right? You don't care about principle. You don't care about philosophy. You don't care about right and wrong. You've chosen your tribe. You've drunk your Kool-Aid. Victory is all that matters, right? How ironic that you're going to lose and lose big. Trump will make whatever vow he thinks will get him what he wants. And if you want to know how serious he is about vows, ask the NRA or Mrs. Trump or Mrs. Trump or Mrs. Trump. On the question of entitlement reform, that's the good news. You can't believe a word that comes out of Trump's mouth. What is Trump's position on entitlement reform? Depends on who's asking. In an interview with Fox and Friends on Tuesday, Trump suggested that we should pay Social Security dependents more than we currently do. The people are not making it on Social Security, he said. It's a very big problem. We'll take care of it. Oh, will we? Under current policy, the unfunded liabilities of Social Security right now are about $25 trillion. And that's a conservative estimate. Different assumptions will, of course, produce much larger results. Say $25 trillion to most people, and you may as well be saying 25 billion or 25 gazillion or 25 bajillion or 25 Google. That's 25 times 10 to the 100th power for you English majors out there, and those of you in Malaga, Washington, of course. Most people have trouble mentally processing such large numbers. It's kind of like what, I think it was Alex Filippenko, the Cal Berkeley celebrity physicist, who said numbers like millions or billions or trillions are difficult for most people to grasp because most people have never seen or had millions, billions, or trillions of anything. So here's a handy comparison. If you took all of the money deposited in all of the banks in the United States and then doubled it, that's how short we are in Social Security alone. That's one program. One. A group of economists, including 15 Nobel laureates, estimated our total long-term unfunded liabilities a few years back at $222 trillion. Almost a quarter of a quadrillion dollars. How big is that number? It's about 3 times the total net worth of all U.S. households combined, which includes all of the directly and indirectly held shares they have in U.S. corporations. It is just shy of the entire stock of wealth held by the human race. Not just money and financial instruments and real estate, houses, cars, vintage sneaker collections, etc. Sometimes communists confronted with those numbers will retort, well, that's over a 75-year timeline, or that's over an infinite time horizon. And that's true. But those unfunded liabilities are not the difference between our future obligations and current assets, but rather are the difference between future obligations and projected future assets. Economic growth will not get us out of this mess because economic growth already is incorporated into the calculations. With that in mind, ask yourself this question. Given that the shortfall of our total future government obligations, not the obligations themselves, just how short we are of paying them, almost equals the entire stock of wealth accumulated by the entire human race over the course of its entire history on this planet, what do you imagine the chances are that those obligations will be paid out in the future at their present value? Now, don't ask me to show my work here, but I'm going to go with something in the neighborhood of 0. Social Security isn't the biggest chunk of our unfunded entitlement liabilities. It's the second biggest chunk behind, ta-da, Medicare. Medicare won't be easy to cut either. To sum up, There's no way in hell, you've got no chance in hell that we're going to pay out what we've already promised. And Trump wants to promise even more, just like the Democrat, the liberal Democrat he really is. The real debate going forward is not how we're going to go about making good on all those promises. It's how we're going to go about not making good on those promises. But console yourselves with this. Donald Trump is a habitual, incorrigible liar. He lies about almost every subject he mentions. He lies about his real estate holdings. He lies about his bankruptcies. He lies to his business partners, lies to his family, lies constantly to the rubes who have bought into his snake oil presidential campaign. According to a Bloomberg report, Trump told Paul Ryan he fundamentally agrees with his entitlement reform ideas, which used to say, with cutting benefits, but doesn't want to say so in public. From Bloomberg, quote, "From a moral standpoint, I believe in it," Trump told Ryan, "but you also have to get elected. And there's no way a Republican is going to be a Democrat when the Republican is saying, we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying, we're going to keep it and give you more." Sound like the typical professional politician establishment squish that you Trumplicans can't stand? That approach isn't new, of course. Jude Wanniski famously described the partisan dynamic in the United States with his two Santa Claus theory, meaning that the Democrats promise goodies in the form of public benefits and the Republicans promise goodies in the form of cutting the taxes to pay for those benefits. The result is enormous public indebtedness and unfunded liabilities. The Republicans had a pretty good run of it, but eventually became victims of their own success. As Mitt Romney once had the bad taste to point out, promising cuts in the federal income tax is not a winning strategy when half the population doesn't pay it. Trump has decided to run on both sides of Wanniski's jolly old political divide. Want tax cuts? He'll promise you enormous, huge, fiscally irresponsible tax cuts. Want tax hikes on venture capitalists and private equity investors? The engine of the global economy. He'll promise you tax hikes too. Hillary Rodham Clinton promises a new stimulus bill with $275 billion in pork. Trump promises to double it. Whee! He's a 5-point drop in the polls away from promising us all unicorns that shit rainbow sherbet. Strangely, this is the best you can really say of Trump. Thank God he's a compulsive liar, because otherwise he'd just be nuts. But then he really is kind of both.